Aloha, everyone. Welcome to Still and Living Center's Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle that we hold on Saturdays at this time. The song that was playing in the background was called La Mémoire d'Abraham, and it's a song by Celine Dion in honor of Abraham Lincoln. Today, our presentation is on the topic in the Still and Moving Center Almanac of the tongue to speak. And this follows earlier topics in the year. We had the ear to hear and the eye to see, for example. And so this is the tongue to speak. And the quote for the week goes like this. It's from the treaty negotiations with 6 nations. I think it was the Iroquois tribes in particular. The Kanehungo, I believe, is the name of these negotiations. So for the tongue to speak, you must speak straight so that your words may go as sunlight into our hearts. We hope that folks had a chance to go. Last week is an exception in the year. Rather than us having one of our Saturday meetings on the week of Diwali, the Indian Festival of Lights, we encourage everyone instead to attend that Festival of Lights, whether online or in person. And so we hope that everyone had a chance to do that. That was for the week of creative altruism. And there are many acts of creative altruism that take place within the story of the Ramayana that we enacted at Diwali. So now we are here this week for the topic of the tongue to speak. We have somebody here who is going to speak to us from the American idealism tradition, Cliff Tillotson, happens to be my husband, I'm very happy to say. And he is someone who is really quite a scholar of Lincoln's, Abraham Lincoln's, and it's from that tradition that he will be speaking. He has in the past at a place in Santa Barbara called the Institute of World Culture given a talk where he impersonated Lincoln, and he actually looked a lot like him when he was all dressed up and had his stovepipe hat on. Today he's speaking, though, as himself, to Cliff Tillotson, and he'll talk to us a little bit about the words of Abraham Lincoln and I think their ability to touch the heart. So, Cliff, we'd like to hand it over to you now, if we may.
Okay, well, the theme for this, it's kind of an echo, yeah?
Oh, hold on. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better. So yeah, the theme for this week is the tongues to speak, and it comes, Mary, right from the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus says, those who have ears to hear, let them hear. Those who have tongues to speak, let them speak. And we've talked a lot about the idea of ears to hear in terms of deep listening, and I think that's listening past, because Jesus spoke in parables, but to listen to the deeper truths that Jesus was saying, that sometimes were being cloaked in parables. But the idea of tongues to speak, I think another ways to say it is courage, the courage to speak. And I thought maybe that could be connected up with the American tradition of idealism, that stems back 250 years now, because we're in 2026, but we are in the semi-quincentennial year of our country when the founders signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, 250 years ago. And by signing that document, they definitely had courage. As Benjamin Franklin once says, well, now, gentlemen, we all are going to have to hang together, or surely we're going to be hanged separately. Because they knew when they put their signature to that document, if the British won the Revolutionary War, they would all be executed. So our country really did begin with a lot of courage, but it also began, it's the first liberal democracy, and a liberal democracy means a representative government elected by the majority of the people, but also liberal in the sense that it protects the rights of minorities at the same time. It recognizes the majority, but protects the minority. So our country was the first country, I believe, ever founded on ideals that were in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. And those ideals were, as stated, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and then also that they have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are our foundational ideals. And I think those ideals are in the hearts of all Americans. Some recognize them more than others. But the first question I'd like to ask is, what is an ideal? And I think a good definition is by the French philosopher Claude de Saint-Martin, who said that an ideal is only truth at a distance. Ideals are real, they just have to be realized at the same time. So, for example, brotherhood is a truth. We're all part of the family of man, we're all part of the family of humanity, but we don't practice it very lot. So it's an ideal in terms of practice. We aspire towards bringing a truth of unity of mankind into our daily practice. So it's both a truth and an ideal because it's not fully realized. Some people call themselves realists, and when you really think about what it means to be a realist, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of reductionist, really, or it often means a materialist, or just a kind of a sense of this is the way things are, and they are always going to be this way. There's no hope for change because ultimately human beings are wicked or weak. But an idealist is someone that aspires to bring these fundamental truths of equality, for example, or beauty or goodness into the world. Idealists believe in the fundamental goodness of all human beings, even though sometimes people don't practice that. So to be an American, in a way, is to have this ideal of equality kind of gnawing at one's heart. Some get inspired by it, and others want to not recognize it. And those that in America that kind of turn their hearts away from this foundational ideal, they kind of try and belittle the rest of us that are very moved and inspired by it by calling us, say, for example, woke. But personally, I don't see anything wrong with being woke. I like the idea of being woke to the ideal of equality, and that we are all created equal. Let's see what so I was thinking that throughout our 250 years of the American experiment of liberal democracy, there have been a number of leaders, both in government and out, who have risen up, had the courage to speak about our ideals and to awaken others an aspiration to embody and practice those ideals like equality. And of course, it goes back to our foundation with the founders, George Washington and Jefferson and Franklin and many others. But throughout our history, I mean, and to me, one of the great courageous speakers about the ideals of equality in America has been Abraham Lincoln. You could also think of Martin Luther King and his wonderful speech, the I Have a Dream speech. Frederick Douglass, at the same time as Lincoln, was a great orator in terms of the ideals of America. And you could even think of John F. Kennedy in his inaugural address. I think even LBJ, he's in his speech to Congress in regards to the Great Society, and Obama in his great speech that put him on the map at the Democratic convention for back in, I think, in San Francisco when he was just a young senator. That there's people that have risen up and spoken about the ideals of America. But one of the greatest speeches in American history is, of course, the Gettysburg Address. And some people say that with that address, it was a new founding of America, a new birth of freedom in America, because in that short address, which is only, I believe, about 220 words, he somehow stirs the hearts of people at the time, soldiers at the time, and at the beginning of the Lincoln movie, some soldiers are standing next to Lincoln, and they recite the Gettysburg Address to Lincoln, two black soldiers and two white soldiers. They had memorized it by heart, and it's a stirring. It's the very beginning of the movie. The movie is just so wonderful. Anyways, but throughout our history from that time on, many people have memorized that speech and have been very inspired by it. And I think in some ways it goes parallel to the part of the Declaration of Independence, because that's only 200 words roughly too. The second paragraph, the first paragraph is basically an opening, but the second paragraph is the meat of the Declaration of Independence, where the ideals of our country are enunciated. And then the rest of the Declaration of Independence is just a list of all the wrongs that King George and the British have done to America. So it's really just in that paragraph of 200 words where the idealism of America is, the seeds of idealism of America are found. But then again, with Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, and then also in his second inaugural, those ideals are brought forth again. And let's see, did I want to say anything else about that? So, and if you look at the back of the dollar, the American dollar, it says "E pluribus unum" on the back of it. That means out of the many, out of our diversity comes our unity. It is our unity, our strength as a people, as Americans, is in our diversity, which is being kind of attacked right now, which is really a shame. So what I wanted to do really is kind of share with you guys a wonderful little scenes from this documentary that Ken Burns put together about a school called the Greenwood School in Vermont that takes in young boys who have learning disabilities or learning struggles. And part of the requirement for graduating from their school is to memorize and stand up in front of their family and all the rest of the school and say the Gettysburg Address. And just in these short little clips, it's only about 5 minutes of time, you can actually, I think, see the transformation of these boys through the practicing and learning about the Gettysburg Address, and then being able to finally get up and have the courage to say that address. Anyways, so I just, if I could, I'm going to play some of these scenes. Renee, is that okay?
Let's give it a try.
Okay, so I do share. What do I do?
Yeah.
Share. And
And
I
then
go desktop.
maybe Kat's gonna be able to guide you even more.
Is that working?
Looks as if it might.
Do you see it, Bob? Ken Burns' address?
We see the name, but get it started first, Cliff. Let's see if it'll go.
My vanishing point.
Oh, I don't see why it.
Yeah, it
Don't
doesn't
see-
seem to be playing.
Huh.
For
Cliff,
most,
so
our-
the reason why it's not showing is that I think it's a copyright issue when you're on Zoom. You're not able to share. You can share the audio of it, but you can't share the video.
Oh, without the video,
Yeah.
it's not the same experience. Well, let's try just the audio though. Okay, just. Oh, it's too bad. That's really too bad. I didn't know that. Oh, well, anyways, I really recommend this documentary by Ken Burns called The Address.
Oh,
In it, these boys really go through a transformation and struggle so much with the Gettysburg Address, but then they finally are able to stand up and say it. Let me just see how it goes just with the audio.
Cliff, why don't you share the name of the link in the chat?
The name it's by Ken Burns and it's called The Address. I think it'll come up. It's on Prime. You'll find it if you just Google Ken Burns The Address.
Okay.
Doggone it though. I'm really bummed about that because it's so wonderful. Anyways, here we go. We'll just listen to it a little bit.
Hey, Massachusetts. So they made me a mistake.
Yeah, okay, well, you guys, you bring a lot to the table.
What you want to do first is take your T-square, line up your horizon line. So I'm going to go up to the top of my first line, the top of the roof. And I'm going to line it up with my vanishing point.
for most children in our culture, school is the second most important place that they are after home. It's the center of their social life, center of their intellectual life. It is the place where they grow and meet challenges. For a lot of these guys who have language-based learning disabilities, that's not a friendly environment. It's an actively hostile environment. It's an environment which poses a lot of challenges. Similarly, they pose a lot of challenges for their teachers, their classmates, sometimes their parents. These are kids who frequently come to Greenwood quite convinced that they're stupid or that they are inadequate, that they are in some way lacking or at fault. So for a kid who has that experience, to undertake the Gettysburg and to be able to say, I believe in myself enough that I can do this, that's asking a lot.
Ethan, last night your assignment was to memorize the next part of the Gettysburg Address. Can we hear?
So let me move it on a little bit, see if I can get another snippet here.
Fourscore and 7 years ago,
Fourscore and 7 years ago,
our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation.
our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation.
Again,
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation.
conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Conceived to liberty and
Dedicated.
dedicated.
Okay, hold it. Dedicated. You say dedicate?
Dedicate.
Dedicate. Dedicate.
I can say it in a sentence.
Okay. Conceived in liberty
Conceived in liberty
and dedicated
and dedicated
to the proposition that all men are created equal.
to the proposition that all men are equal.
Are created equal.
Created equal.
Dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Dedicated to the proposition of all men are equal.
Are created equal.
You say dead.
Okay, we'll work on that.
You say dead. Dead.
And then say Kate.
Kate.
I say dedicate.
Dedicate.
Good. Excellent. There it was. Nice job. Nice job.
Can I hear that again? What's the sentence?
I have set my heart on getting first, second, and so
Or,
third.
okay, so you did really well on first and second. Do you know what happened on third?
What?
I heard it. I'm going to tell you, say it the way you said it. Third.
Okay.
Is that correct? Third? No, what did I do? Wait. I want you to be listening using your ears and watching my mouth. I said surd. Is that the word we wanted?
No.
What do we want?
Third.
Yes, good job. So read this again.
I have set my height on getting first, second, or third place in the Gettysburg competition.
And here's them at the end. I'll play the end here.
Fourscore and 7 years ago.
7 years ago. 7 years ago. Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. A new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
And then this last little bit.
Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure.
We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live.
It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here
Have consecrated it far above all propelled out of the tract.
The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here.
It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here, the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced.
It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remain before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion.
That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain.
That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Anyway,
That was still very effective. Thank you so much.
with the image, I mean, I really do recommend watching this show because you watch the transformation of these kids who came to the schools just beaten down and have so little confidence in themselves. And then by the end, they just hit the ball out of the park. You know, it's not just memorizing something. It's the idealism, the inspiration of what Lincoln did at that moment that stirs in them what it means to be an American and to live a life by inspiring to make the world a better place for all people. And so it's just a wonderful little documentary that he made. And it's just about to come out now. He's made a documentary for our 250-year celebration of our country about the Revolutionary War. And I think it's many different episodes will be coming out, I think, starting in this month of November for a number of months. So I'm looking forward to watching this new documentary of Ken Burns. It was very challenging for him because, back in revolutionary times, there were no photographs or anything, unlike when he did the Civil War one, there were photographs that he could use and do what's called the Ken Burns effect too. But here it's all, it was a great challenge for him to tell the story of the revolution, but I'm really looking forward to it. He's a great storyteller, Ken Burns. Anyways, that's my little presentation on American idealism.
So we by the time we were hearing these young men, boys, turning into young men speak, this quote for the week of you must speak straight so that your words may go as sunlight into our hearts. That seemed to come through to me, that they were speaking directly from their hearts into ours. And let's see.
I'm sorry, but I was going to say I cut off at the end there. After they spoke at the very end, they went back to their families, and it was just, I mean, I was actually crying because the families were just so moved by what their sons had done. So yeah, without the images, you can't, you can maybe get, I don't know, 40% of what the effect, but it's a beautiful documentary.
Does anybody have a comment or question that they want to raise in terms of this topic of the tongue to speak? Well, Cliff, you probably knew I was going to put you on the spot a little bit. I think Lincoln himself definitely had the tongue to speak. It's exemplified in the Gettysburg Address, and yet it came out over and over the course of his lifetime. And it seems as though his ability to tell stories is one of the things that we really remember him for, because there would be times of great tension, for example, that just seemed as if everybody was going to be at each other's throats. And yet somehow Lincoln often would have the ability to dissipate that tension and then go beyond it to actually finding ways for people to come to some sort of resolution or moving forward in some way. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, well, it's a wonderful study to study Lincoln. He's such an amazing human being and such an amazing story, you know, coming from almost complete poverty to becoming the president of the United States. And he only had like really 3 books. It's kind of famous thing about Lincoln that he really studied as he was growing up, and they were the Bible, Shakespeare, and the elements of Euclid. And but somehow by bringing those 3 together, it allowed him, I think the Bible is where he got his ethics, you know, Shakespeare is where he got his politics, he said. And of course, with Euclid, he's got his reasoning powers of thinking mathematically. So when he starts this Gettysburg Address, it says, 87 years ago, 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And all of Euclid's theories or formulas, they're all called propositions. So he's actually fitting Euclid right into that first sentence. But yeah, Lincoln, I think one of the things that's interesting about the Gettysburg Address and about the idea of tongues to speak is the idea of appropriateness. Because there was a guy, I think his name was John Wills, who was in charge of putting together the dedication of the cemetery at Gettysburg shortly after the Gettysburg battle, where I think it was about 50,000 people were killed in that battle. It was just an absolutely terrible battle. There were still bodies on the battlefield when Lincoln went to give his address. But John Willis just sent a cryptic note to Lincoln and said, if you have the time, it would be nice if you came down and just said a few appropriate words. And so Lincoln took that to heart, that all he was supposed to do was say just a few appropriate words. but I think it was like November, when he got that note from Willis. It was early November. And then he realized he was going to actually be able to go. So he contemplated for about 2 weeks what he might say. But then in the short period of 3 days, he wrote the Gettysburg Address because he knew he was going to go. And it was the idea, what is my appropriate role in this? And so he went down there, and I guess the cameraman who was going to take a picture of Lincoln when he gave the address wasn't able to get his camera set up in time because it was only 2 minutes long, his address. And then the main speaker at the dedication of the cemetery was a guy named Edward Elliot, I think. Is that it, Bob? Edward Elliot. And he spoke for over 2 hours. And he was one of the great orators of the time. He was actually a teacher at Harvard of Emerson, took classes from Edward Elliot. And he spoke for 2 hours. And the day after, he wrote Lincoln a note and said, I wish that in my long address, I had even come close to touching the true meaning of the event that you were in 2 hours, that you were able to do in 2 minutes. And that was, a very self-effacing, humble statement by Edward Elliot. But Lincoln, in return, responded to him saying, no, we both had different roles to play in this ceremony, and you were totally appropriate with what you said, and I hope that I was appropriate in what I said. But his words have gone on, and people have gained inspiration from them for so long. But Lincoln, I think that was something about Lincoln throughout his life, is he was always asking himself, what's the appropriate thing for me to say in this context? And I was thinking about that in regards to this teaching that you and I've had, Renee, on the 6 virtues by Robert Crosby, where the part of what it means to have wisdom is to be able to say or do the right thing at the right time to the right person. It's kind of like hitting the mark. And so Lincoln somehow knew that sometimes the most appropriate thing was not to engage intellectually, but to tell a story. In fact, many times he would break the ice by telling some outlandish story or joke. He loved jokes. So there was something about him that felt that a lot of times the best, most appropriate thing was just to lighten the atmosphere. So he would tell these wonderful jokes. There's a few of them in the Lincoln movie, one of the classics. I don't know if you want me to tell it, but so Lincoln, yeah, he actually studied all these books on humor and just had some of the most funniest stories. He was actually, in many ways, he was what would you call it? Someone that struggled, with dark moods and so forth. But it was through humor that he would able to elevate himself and elevate others out of, say, difficult times or gloomy times and so forth. But
Well, sure, we'd love to hear one, Cliff.
well, I could tell the one from the Lincoln movie that's super funny is that I think it was after the war, after the Revolutionary War, and I can't remember which person it was. Went to England, and I can't remember if it was Jefferson. I can't remember who it was, but he was at some dignitary's house, and he had to use the Louvre, the bathroom. But back then they had outhouses, and this British fellow decided to put a portrait of George Washington in the outhouse, and so whoever it was, if it was Jefferson, I don't know, went out to use the bathroom and came back and didn't say anything about it and was surprised that no one had come, everybody at the party or whatever knew that a picture of George Washington was in the outhouse. And yet this person didn't say anything about it. And so finally the host said, "Oh, did you notice any portraits or anything in the outhouse or whatever?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, I saw there was one of George Washington, and I thought that was very appropriate." And and uh, and the host said, "Appropriate? Why do you say that?" "Well, because whenever a British person would see the face of George Washington, they would shit in their pants." So, anyways, Lincoln tells that story in the Lincoln movie when they're all in suspense, waiting to get a telegraph from the front lines to see if Ulysses S. Grant had just won the recent battle. And then Lincoln just starts laughing at his own jokes. He always be the first person to laugh at his own jokes. But he had a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. And Daniel Day-Lewis, I think, portrays Lincoln to a T. When I watched that movie, and I've probably watched it 5 times, I actually feel like I'm looking at Lincoln when I'm watching Daniel Day-Lewis play that part.
Thank you so much. Yeah, what is it, I wonder, in our own lives that makes it feel that something is appropriate? For example, we might say something to someone that we've already said to another person, and it was just brilliant at the time. And then when we say it again to someone else, it just falls completely flat. It was the wrong thing to say. Why is that? How does that happen?
I think one thing about appropriateness is I kind of go back to a Confucian idea of straight talk. The American Indians talked about a forked tongue, like a serpent. There's no truth in it. And the Confucians talk about standing upright. So it's not so much what you're saying, but how you're saying it in a way that communicates. And it's really the kind of almost the role you're playing to an intimate group. You're not talking at people, you're with them as a family and talking about the truths that we hold self-evident. I loved what Cliff said about prepositions, because prepositions ultimately, step by logical step, can be traced back to self-evident truths. So ultimately, there are clear and distinct ideas that are there. And as long as you're upright, as long as you're standing firm with those ideals connected to them, you can't fail. And I think Lincoln really realized that. He's, as Cliff said, he was a self-taught man from beginning to end, and yet becomes one of really the most elegant Americans we've ever had. But I think that self-taughtness really connects to that what we're saying is ultimately the truth. And if it's not, then we don't say it. And so humor works that way because, in a sense, it's connecting to something that is self-evident. And again, it's interesting to see that, but I think it's more how we approach the world, how we see ourselves. And I like the idea that the Confucians connect it back to our family, and they start from there rather than to the ultimate far ideal that is pretty intellectual. I think you need that connection of people and intimacy, and that's where I think Lincoln has both of those. And it's amazing to watch. You mentioned Martin Luther King's speech, "I Have a Dream," and he says 5 score years ago. And so he's using Lincoln's words, referring to the Gettysburg Address, but he's not saying 87 years ago, he's saying a certain, he's saying something a little different. He's actually connecting back to the Emancipation Proclamation and then to Lincoln. And ultimately, Lincoln's 7 years ago traced it back to exactly what you said, the Declaration of Independence. So, he's almost saying 4 times in our history, we were brought back to a self-evident truth. That's an elegant way of putting it.
Well, isn't a self-evident truth, to use that, it's like an invitation to the other person or the group to kind of join in and recognize that there is that they too can see a truth. And by seeing a truth, then that encourages them to maybe think about it a little bit more. So it is a way of kind of to reach out to something inward in another person. Whereas, we get into this notion of debate. Well, you have your view and they have their view, and that's going to perpetuate a division, it seems to me. So I always thought that self-evident truth idea was really a powerful and self-sacrificing, you might say, approach to others. And you were assuming that they could see truth, and that was important to them, to the original speaker. I mean, Lincoln didn't. If you go back into a little bit of his, when he was in Illinois and he was traveling around as a circuit court judge, I think it was, and all that, he didn't have any problem with reaching out to, that was the trick. He could reach out to others, go have dinner and drinks with the local establishment, etc. And yet he never kind of collapsed into kind of false jocularness. He didn't let himself be compromised, but yet he could somehow just kind of be part of whatever group that he was with, and trying to survive with and all. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah. So in a way, he had a lot of practice in togetherness and drawing people together. Even if he had to, once he got to Washington, he had these people who were perverse and made things very difficult for him.
It's very interesting because that hits Lincoln very directly, because it was not only what he said, but when and how he was not able to say something. He always felt slavery was wrong and he spoke against it. But he struggled with racism, the black laws in Indiana, various things, because as a politician, he said, if you're not ready to hear it, we're not on the same page, then I've got to find something that I can tell you that you will understand. And so he basically says, I will obey the Constitution. And the Constitution is not what Cliff was talking about with ideals. The Constitution is a very practical thing that it deals with slavery by another name, but slavery is in the Constitution, in that 3/5 clause. And Lincoln, you have to be in the right spot. It took him many years before he was able to give the Gettysburg Address. Up until that time, the war was about preserving the Union. That's what it was about. At the Gettysburg Address, he said, well, it is about that, but it's also fundamentally about all men are created equal. That shifted the grounds, as Cliff said. That's a new foundation, or a reference back to a foundation, that preservation of the Union is a very practical thing. If you're going to get everybody to sign on, you're going to have the 3/5 clause, at least for a while. So, Lincoln was aware that not everyone was able to hear him. And with racism, he came to it at the right time. And you mentioned Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass just disliked Lincoln at the beginning because he wasn't able to do certain things. And at one point, he said he's just so frustrated with him. But he said, after I met him, he's the only white man that treated me equally, that actually talked to me and face to face kind of thing. He said, I've talked to hundreds of abolitionists, and white abolitionists, I guess, and he didn't feel that. And so at one point, he becomes a great admirer of Lincoln based on not only what he said, but also the conditions he was faced with as a politician.
We have a phrase that's being used a lot these days of reading the room. And it takes it to, a very kind of colloquial, very, very close level, I think. And yet I think that it holds a certain degree of truth. The room is not the room is not the room at all times the same. It's reading the room right now with the people who are in it right now, with all the thoughts and emotions and sets of beliefs that they're holding at this time, that we need to read before we issue whatever it is that's going to come out of our mouths, if it is to be appropriate. And certainly if somebody wants to be reductionist and take a tremendous human being like Abraham Lincoln and just reduce him down to what he might have said to a particular room at a particular time in his life, and say that is the defining mark of Lincoln, and so therefore he's a racist. That is such a very circumscribed way of viewing this vast expanse of evolution that had to go on within the consciousness of the American public. So reading the room was reading the American people and what he was going to be able to say and in fact do according to what was ripe in the moment. What was the room ready for at this moment? And so that by the time we had gotten to, for example, the Gettysburg Address, and we're coming to the conclusion of the Civil War, then we can start talking about what was really in his heart to begin with. But like you say, Bob, couldn't come out of his mouth and be appropriate at that point in time.
And I said he was educated. He was learning all the time. He changed his mind at certain key positions. And I think Douglass recognized that if he could present the argument in a way that allowed Lincoln to understand how Black people thought, which is not an easy thing for white people to do at that time, then Lincoln would listen and Lincoln would learn. And he felt that. He said, this person is honest enough to be able to admit that something is wrong and change. And so, it's not that he's this wise person standing above us all because he's clear and distinct. He just has an attitude that that's what he is trying. He's trying to be upright, the best he can. And it's funny to look at him because he had virtues that he felt were against the main group. I mean, he said, I don't gamble, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't hunt. Everybody else does. I'm the outlier. I'm the strange one. And he never pushed any of those things on other people, but he fundamentally felt that he would not. I think he killed an animal when he was a young boy, and he just never would do it again. Hunting was off the table for him, just because of how it made him feel. He never tried to preach it. He never was speaking towards what the evils of alcohol, the evils of cursing and swearing, or whatever it was. Those were his private virtues. It's interesting to kind of compare private and public in that way.
Cliff, did you do any thinking about his speech in Boston, which was packed with white, fairly elite white people that were not interested in abolitionism? They just kind of wanted the status quo. And I've forgotten the key argument he put forth, but he didn't have any status. He was kind of awkward in appearance. He didn't have a fancy suit on, but so the attitude was that, well, okay, listen to this guy, but he's not really going to be a effective leader and attract people. But he did swing the audience around to him, and that made a huge difference, evidently, in New England, where you would think there'd be some sympathy towards not equality, but to the practicality of abolitionists. And so did you ever kind of, I remember reading about this dramatic evening, but I can't remember the details of how he did it, but it helped swing New England Republicans. They weren't Republicans quite yet. They were Federalists, I guess, to open their ears and to see that there was a real value to getting rid of this slavery and this conflict.
This wasn't a speech prior to him being president, was it?
Pardon?
Was it a speech that he gave when he was on the campaign trail?
No, I think it was, I think it was a little before that.
But before he was president?
Before he was president, yeah.
Doesn't that speech have a famous name to it?
It's the New York Union Hall speech.
Yeah. Is that the one you're thinking of, Carolyn?
No, the one in Boston.
Well, he redid it several times. He did it about 13 times across New England.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, what he was doing there was not arguing for freedom or anything. The question was, are the founding fathers of mixed minds about slavery? And he basically said, less than you would think. And he just went historically through all of the founding fathers and the votes that they took. For example, in the Northwest Territory, keeping slavery out of it. And he just said, if you look at their votes, regardless of whether they held slaves or not, by their votes, they were pretty much unanimous of saying slavery is contradictory to our founding principles. And that was the argument he made. Yeah. And it was based on historical research, just person by person.
Exactly. That we really did have common principles, and we were too divided by party affiliations, which were changing at the time. So that's why the politics in part was so chaotic, is because there was a new Republican Party, there were other parties, and so he wanted to get beyond that partisanship and point to the common principles that we actually share and which would make America great again.
I want to mention somebody that I have a lot of respect for, that I don't know very much about, but it was a Republican senator, a woman named Senator Margaret Chase Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And during the McCarthy period, when there was the Red Scare about communists in this country, and the FBI was doing their best to find and bring to justice communists amongst us, she delivered a speech in the Senate called the Declaration of Conscience. And this was in 1950. And she defended every American's right to criticize and the right to hold unpopular beliefs and their right to protest.
Yeah.
And so these courageous acts of speech, they don't just go on one side of the aisle. they can come from different sides when people really are going to their truths and speaking that self-evident truth and holding to it against what they feel are acts of injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that a speech like that probably went straight to the hearts of a lot of people.
Yeah, and so she came under attack, obviously, by the McCarthyism of that very moment, that very decade of the 50s.
Yeah.
Did she actually run for president?
I don't know, but I would imagine that she helped to turn the tide,
Yeah.
the public opinion against what was happening.
Well, Cliff, if you had to write a speech today, that you had an opportunity to speak to a group and you actually it would be broadcast to the nation.
Oh my God.
What would you want to say? What would you want to, and how could you even include something positive about President Trump or something, or just go beyond that somehow? But what, if you were given the open mic for half an hour, what would you want to tell us?
But you only have 2 minutes, like Lincoln did. It's 3:58.
Gosh, Carol, that's just such a hard question to. I am thinking, I'm reminded of what Lincoln once said about, he said that every political view that he ever had always stemmed from the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
That was our founding. A lot of people want to brush the Declaration of Independence aside, but he said somewhere else that the Declaration of Independence is the golden apple and the Constitution is the silver frame around that apple.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, unfortunately, and that's kind of what I wanted to show that Greenwood, those young children, is with all these distractions we have with social media and all this other stuff that's going on, we're really worried. I think what's his name? Chris Murphy, the Senator Chris Murphy, is really worried that we're not teaching about the ideals that America was built upon in our schools. So if I was to give some kind of speech, I'd like it to be appropriate and relevant, that children could understand how important it is to understand what it means to be an American in terms of living by ideals, not brushing them aside, not pushing back against them like the Trump administration, in my opinion, is doing, trying to get rid of all the DEI programs, the diversity, equity, inclusion programs. That's what America's about. America's about diversity and equity and inclusion. So I think I'd like to say something along those lines. But there was one quote I read recently about a principal back in the 1800s and a lot of and most of the schools back in the 1800s, they recognized that the most important thing wasn't learning like reading, writing, and arithmetic. The most important thing to learn in school was morality, ethics, building character. And so this one principal said that we want to teach our boys in this school that they can be acceptable at a prom dance, but invaluable in a shipwreck. You know, I love that statement that we want the young of our country to grow up with character. As Thoreau said, you know, how can you expect a harvest of thought without a seed time of character? So all great speakers, all great heroes are people that have a foundationally strong moral character. So I would try to figure out some way in my talk to encourage strong ethical education for the sake of our democracy, which is, and to recognize the preciousness of our democracy. You know, that I would want to say something along those lines, Carolyn.
Thank you. That was beautifully said, Cliff. Thank you so much. I'm going to let you know about next week's presentation and the conversation we'll be having thereafter. And while I'm doing that, maybe somebody could prepare to give a little vote of thanks to Cliff. We are coming to the week of living simply. There's a Shaker song, "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free. 'Tis a gift to come down where we ought to be, and when we are in that place just right, we shall be in the valley of love and delight." And something about just living simply like the Shakers did might be the something of the ideal where we'd be thinking about. However, we're not going to the Shaker tradition. We're actually going to go to the Indian tradition of Mahatma Gandhi, who actually had really a code of living for the people who lived in his ashrams, his intentional community. And living simply was one of the vows that people who are going to live in his communities actually agreed to. And so for that, we have somebody who is a lifetime Gandhian. He has spoken to us on a number of occasions. His name is Prakash Tyagi, and he is the head of a nonprofit in Rajasthan, India. So he'll be speaking to us very early in the morning, Indian time, and for the topic of living simply. So that's for November 8th. Is there somebody who would like to give a vote of thanks to Cliff for his presentation today?
Yeah.
Okay, Bob?
Well, I'm always so impressed with Cliff's integrity and ability to get to the heart of things. I mean, uprightness and appropriateness are exactly what it is. And as he mentioned, Lincoln found his ethics in the Bible, and that's something that his community shared. So he found it there, but he was also able to use it to communicate with people. And I thought, Cliff does a wonderful job of helping us realize ourselves and how we can share things effectively. And I love the examples you gave of the young people who in a sense kind of grew into the words. They were memorizing it as artificial words, not even quite knowing what the word dedicated was not a word that kid knew. And yet at the end, probably he did have a sense, deep inside himself, what it meant, even though the definition wasn't there, the feeling was there. And that's a really wonderful way of being able to be appropriate. So thank you so much. It's very appropriate for the days in which we're in. If we can find something that in the Bible that we can both share, because the Bible is an interesting thing. And Lincoln once said, there's two sides and they both quote the Bible. So how do you find the part of the Bible that we share rather than the ones we use against each other? And Lincoln, I think, did that. A house divided against itself cannot stand. We can agree on that. Well, then we're in trouble. We better start agreeing on other things. So thank you for that positive feeling negative time.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. It was wonderful to have you all here. We're glad to have Adela here. Kat, thank you for being our hostess. And Rainbow, we're very glad that you were able to join us today. Hope to be able to see you again. Cliff, thank you so much. It was really beautiful. Nice to have you, Mary. Bye-bye.
Come back soon.
Yes.